Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, the growing heartbreak for Kiwi workers and business owners as companies collapse in record numbers. We look at why so many here are going under.
Company liquidations are at a 10-year high, pointing to tough times for construction and retail in 2025.
There were 671 more company liquidations in 2024 compared to 2023, up by a third.
Finance Minister Nicola Willis acknowledged today that businesses are still struggling after years of tough economic conditions.
This crisis doesn't discriminate. It's targeting big, established firms, small mum and dad companies, and everything in between. The devastating headlines, it seems, are never ending.
Last year, 2,500 businesses went into liquidation. That's nearly 700 more than in 2023 and the highest number since 2014.
From 7 stores to now just 4. Baby City was among those forced into liquidation.
Heading to Gisborne, where an iconic family-owned manufacturer, Columbine Industries, is shutting down.
The closure of Smith & Co.'s will result in 98 redundancies.
A lot of the clothing shops are closing down. These shops going down all the time.
A number of them have said it's been the toughest year ever that they've had, and they've been working in retail 20, 25, 30 years.
And if they haven't already gone bust, many are just holding on. And I mean just.
They don't want to go into liquidation, so they are doing everything they can to stay relevant and stay available and to be open.
So today I talked to Newsroom business reporter Alice Peacock, who has been crunching the numbers, and Deloitte partner Rob Campbell, who specialises in business restructuring, turnaround and cost transformation. We look at what is causing the business boom to bust crisis and if there are any green shoots emerging. I'll start with some good news of sorts from Alice.
Businesses are closing down, but businesses are also opening up. I was at a hospitality conference a couple of months back in Wellington, and there were some really amazing stories to come out of that. I mean, no one was trying to pretend that it hadn't been a tough few years, but there was one lead speaker who mentioned the number of liquidations, but then was also trying to debunk a perception about the industry that it was all doom and gloom, and pointed to numbers that showed that, yes, company liquidations in the industry have risen over the last few years, but company incorporations, so those cafe and restaurant businesses that are opening, have also risen and had actually outnumbered the business closures in recent years as well.
Oh, that's great news. So, Alice, is there hope on the horizon?
I like to think that there is. I mean, it's tied to the wider economy, so I don't think that there's a straight yes or no answer to that, unfortunately. It's still tough at the moment. You know, there are still those high costs, and I don't think that anyone would say the economy is clearly in a recovery phase yet. But there definitely do seem to be signs of, things improving. And I think at least in the sectors that I've been looking at, people have been speaking of there being better times on the horizon.
So far this year, there have been 1,270 liquidations. That's up 12% on this time last year. Rob Campbell has worked hard to save some of them.
Yeah, I get involved when businesses experience a level of volatility or stress, and it can be early signs of stress right through to when things become more terminal. And my job really is to ideally help turn the business around, steer it off, the rocks out into open water where possible. And if that's not possible, then how we resolve the company's affairs in an orderly manner.
Now, to kick off with, it probably sounds like a really basic question, but what is liquidation? When a business goes into liquidation, we keep hearing record high. What does that mean, Rob?
Yeah, a liquidation is when a company is insolvent, and what that means is it cannot pay its creditors, and there's no prospect of the company's business being salvaged in its current form. So a liquidator gets appointed, which is an independent party to take control of the business's affairs, and the liquidator will look to realise the company's assets for as much as possible in order to repay creditors to the extent it can.
Company liquidations, you would have seen this, they've hit a 10-year high.
New government figures show 2,500 businesses went into liquidation last year, up by a third.
And until consumer confidence bursts back into the scene, it's expected to continue.
At the moment, and we've got these headlines of 10-year highs, 12-year highs, what's causing this? Why are financially we in so much sort of trouble when it comes to our companies?
Yeah, you're right. It's the highest level of insolvency since 2013, which is coming off the back of the GFC. What it really boils down to is you might recall cost of living crisis, high interest rates, rising unemployment. All of those factors is what sort of led to high levels of liquidations. But some of that sort of feels like it was playing out 2 or 3 years ago, and there's a real lag effect from when stress is first experienced by a business to when it may become ultimately insolvent. And that's because revenue might start to decline or costs increase, and it takes time for the company's reserves to start getting used up. And so that might play out over 2 or 3 year period. And so you sort of start to see gradually over time the creditors increase. It might be IRD arrears start to increase, and eventually it becomes unmanageable for the business, and eventually it needs to go into liquidation. So the reason we're seeing high levels of liquidations now is through the economic factors that we've been experiencing over the last couple of years.
Who makes that decision? Is it IRD? Who makes the ultimate decision that, right, your company's going into liquidation?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways. Either the shareholders can resolve to place the company's affairs into liquidation, or otherwise it's a creditor. And you reference IRD, they are the largest creditor that petition the court. So you have to go to the court and say, this company's insolvent, it cannot repay the amount of money that it owes to me, and we would like the court to make an order to put the company into liquidation.
What sort of money are we talking about? How much in debt are companies that you know of, from the small scale of debt to the large scale? What's the sort of spectrum there?
Oh, look, it can be as simple as a few $1,000s through to several $1 million. So there is no minimum, there's no maximum. It really depends on the level of creditors that a company has outstanding.
Almost 1 in 5 companies that have gone into liquidation so far this year are from the construction sector. It comes as the Reserve Bank warns rising building costs are the biggest driver of inflation and the biggest risk to the economy.
The sectors driving this, who are worse affected at the moment?
Well, there's no sector that's immune from the current levels of stress in the economy, but there are definitely some that are more affected. And those are those that are more sort of affected by higher interest rates. So, construction activity, the real estate market's been particularly slow. Discretionary retail has been much slower as well. So, if you think about buying a new car, those types of industries, or if you're buying a new fridge, or sort of a non-essential item that you don't necessarily need to purchase, those demand for that is certainly a lot slower at the moment as well.
Do you think we've peaked, so to speak, or is there worse to come?
I think we're getting closer to the peak, but there's still a bit to play out. As I referenced, the IRD is the biggest driver of liquidation activity, and the level of unpaid PAYE and GST is increasing significantly. It was about 1.5 billion unpaid PAYE and GST in the June 2025 year, and that's an increase from about 500 million for the 2023 year. And if you go back even further to 2019, 2020, less than 100 million of unpaid PAYE and GST. So it has risen exponentially, but that rate of growth is, I'd say, starting to slow. But there's a bit to play out in terms of the number of liquidations, but I feel we're closer to the peak now than we have been.
Can liquidators keep up?
Yeah, liquidators are busy. Yeah, certainly. Particularly the operators that operate in that smaller end and mid-market. There are certainly some operators, liquidators that are taking on quite a heavy caseload at the moment. So yes, it's certainly, for those that are in the business of doing liquidations, it's certainly a busy period.
Well, a former Wishbone employee says she's in shock after suddenly losing her job on Monday when the company went into liquidation.
There's the financial cost, and we focus on that a lot. But what about the human cost, the emotional sort of mental fallout from this? What do you see in here?
There's a couple of things. Often business owners that end up with their business going through a more difficult patch. They've built the business up over a long period of time. Maybe they've inherited the business from their parents. So it can be really difficult to reach out and ask for help, often from pride. But that's probably the worst thing you can do. If you can reach out to your suppliers, your customers, your employees, often if you share the experience or the position of your business, they may have ideas or be willing to help or provide support. So what I'd encourage business owners to do is don't bottle it up. and sort of share with your key stakeholders, to use that word, the position of your business, what are the challenges it's experiencing, and perhaps how they might be able to help. But when a business does fall into liquidation, it can be pretty traumatic. And it's never a nice experience to go through a liquidation. The people that we immediately focus on if we are appointed as a liquidator or receiver is the employees first, right? Because they're abruptly out of work. It's unlikely they're going to get their wages paid immediately. And if we are fortunate to recover assets to pay those, it's often some weeks and months down the track. So, we always feel for the employees first. But it's important not to forget about anyone, because everyone does get impacted by these scenarios.
And as one company fails, the domino effect can kick in, and that fallout can be devastating.
It also has flow-on impacts to affected suppliers. They're out of pocket, and that impacts their own business, and they might be going through a period of stress as well. And the last thing they need is to have one to lose a customer, but also to have that customer not pay them as well. So, yes, it can have a bit of a spiral effect.
Have you ever had a situation where a company has liquidated and that's actually forced the liquidation of other companies under them?
Yes, certainly.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does happen, and one from a direct financial consequence as well, but also in times like these, businesses are much more careful around their credit management. The ability to extend payment terms is the ability and the willingness to do that is restricted at the moment. So, when you do need a bit of accommodation from your creditors, when they're wanting you to pay on time every month, or they've got concerns about you, then it can sort of have that domino effect.
So if someone's sitting here or listening to this today and might be thinking, God, I'm actually in trouble, what's one bit of advice or a tip you can give them to take note of that red flag?
Yeah, reach out early. The earlier you reach out, the more options you're likely to have.
And who do you reach out to, though?
Talk to your lenders. If you've got a bank involved, talk to your customers, talk to your employees. I think if you share the position of the company and its affairs in a transparent manner, then people are more likely to assist. Also reach out to your advisors, talk to your accountant, your lawyer. Getting expert help as early as possible is key. This might feel like a bit of a doom and gloom interview, but where we specialise and focus on is in that turnaround restructuring space, and more often than not there is a solution, but you do need to reach out and get help. If you bottle the issue up and look to shoulder it alone, that becomes a lot more challenging.
How many companies are you managing to save, like to turn around and to get them out of that doldrums?
I would say it's a reasonably high success rate. I don't have a percentage figure or anything like that for you, but relatively high. Where we struggle is when people reach out at the final hour, and by that time options are exhausted.
Too late.
Patience with your creditors or your bank, maybe wearing very thin. Promises that have been made and not delivered on. The ability to get ongoing support becomes more limited.
For those who are looking to start up a business right now, what's your advice? And would you say do it or hold off? No,
absolutely. Take the plunge. We need entrepreneurs to be generating new ideas and inventing things and starting new businesses. Get on and do it. Like some of the clients at Deloitte, they've been sitting on their hands for a wee while now, and they've come to the realisation that we're not going to sit around and wait forever, otherwise we'll get left behind. So, they're starting to think about their growth strategies again, where they should invest wisely. So, no, take the plunge. You'll learn a lot along the way, but having a clear business plan is always helpful. Have a good accountant, a good lawyer, and just get into it. And if it doesn't work, fail fast, move on to the next thing.
Alice Peacock covers the business round, but she's not so sure she'd go into business in the current climate.
Right now? No, I don't think so. I think it's amazing that, we do have these entrepreneurs and these people that have the balls to go out there and start up these businesses. I don't know if I would kind of have the guts to do it myself, to be honest.
As I was interviewing Alice, another long-time prominent business in Auckland announced it was going into liquidation. Opened in the 1990s, Dragon Boat restaurant now owes at least $1.4 million to creditors. The devastating headline took many by surprise.
It's a sad chapter for a place that's been around for almost 30 years. The Dragon Boat restaurant on Elliott Street has been a staple of the local Chinese food scene since it opened.
You've been covering this for Newsroom. Some of the notable ones in the headlines. Talk us through this. Who's going under?
A few at the end of last year, which we've reported on, include Solar Zero. We've had The Body Shop.
This is another case of going woke and going broke. The Body Shop, the British cosmetic company, it's been plunged into administration.
The Body Shop is bust, in administration and unable to pay its bills as they fall due.
A big global business which went into liquidation at the end of last year, and that's impacted its stores in New Zealand as well. We have had Nanogirl Labs, Michelle Dickinson's education company, and then in more recent weeks, a few smaller ones that you might recognise, New York Bagels. So consumers might recognise the name from their supermarket shelves. And then we have also had a number of restaurants and cafes which have also hit the headlines as well.
It doesn't seem to discriminate. We're talking big companies, small companies, everything in between companies. Is that what you're noticing too?
In terms of which companies this is impacting, small businesses have been hit harder from what I've seen in kind of liquidation lists anyway. And I think that's because for that size of company, it's harder for them to recover those costs and to move on financially. We're also seeing these numbers most driven by construction companies, and hospitality is coming in second in terms of liquidation numbers, and that has risen past property, which historically has been really big for business failures. It's interesting, probably what we're seeing hit the headlines doesn't fully represent what's actually happening. I mean, hospitality businesses, I guess they're consumer-facing, they're the company names that people know, so they're more likely to be reported on than the smaller, local, maybe family-run scaffolding companies or your local roofer, that type of thing.
When you're talking to these companies and the workers, what impact is it having on them? What are they saying to you?
So it does really take a toll. There's obviously, people behind these companies, and there are employees who, in some of the unfortunate circumstances here can be left with money owed to them. And then the business owners, I mean, these situations can be immensely stressful, obviously, when you're left with, firstly, the company that you've kind of fought to build not being financially viable anymore, and with these debts owed that, that can come to hit them personally as well when they've maybe put their own assets on the line.
Here in Auckland's CBD, Vivace restaurant, which operated for more than 3 decades, went into liquidation on Christmas Eve, costing 20 jobs. The owner, Mandy Lusk, told us she knows of at least 5 other restaurants in the same situation.
I understand that they took a bit of a wait-and-see approach during the pandemic, and now a lot of the debt that's arisen during that time is essentially being called in.
People have been talking about the COVID hangover, and they've been talking about that a lot. Is that still fair today? Do we still have that COVID hangover?
We definitely do. I think we are really still seeing that COVID hangover, and I think there are 2 parts to that. So in terms of the situation for companies themselves, we are still seeing that those debts that were perhaps accumulated during those COVID years are still weighing upon companies. The other aspect of that is IRD activity. So the taxman or the tax office has been really cracking down on these companies that have racked up these big debts. And the department has actually been really open about that. So last year, the IRD committed to spending more money on compliance, on chasing up those debts and closing down those companies that perhaps have had their debt spiral. And that has really meant that perhaps in situations in the last few years where there's been a lot more leniency, that leniency has gone away and companies really are being chased up.
Businesses are going belly up in record numbers. IRD enforced liquidations made up more than 70% of applications last month. In fact, for the past 2 years, IRD insolvency applications have outstripped all other creditors combined, as the department implies more pressure for failing businesses to cough up tax debts.
We had a record high, obviously, last year. Are we anticipating going even higher this year with liquidations?
From what we've seen in the last few months, I wouldn't be surprised.
But just how big the problem is perhaps being hidden by so-called zombie companies who can just service their debt but lack excess capital for growth or can't attack the principal amount of their debt, only managing to meet interest payments. Here's Rob again.
A zombie company is where the business is probably not viable. Its prospects of turning itself around are somewhat limited, but it's incurring liabilities, and often that's with inland revenue. And inland revenue are an involuntary creditor. They don't offer to supply you with goods and services. A business accounts to IRD for the GST it's collected and the PAYE it's deducted from its customers and from its employees. And it can take time for the IRD to recognise that the arrears are increasing.
Having these zombie companies, is that masking maybe just how big the problem is?
Look, I think it is playing through, but it's that lag effect again in terms of when stress arrives and when it translates into a failure of a business.
Rob, are we seeing any kind of green shoot? A little hope on our horizon, light at the end of the tunnel?
Yes, I think so. Like anything, this will pass. Interest rates are on a downward trajectory, which should help support demand and household spending again, which should flow through to better economic activity. You think about out to the regions, the commodity prices are high, milk prices getting towards record levels. So, out in the regions, things are looking a lot more promising. I think it's going to take a little bit longer to flow through into the urban centres, where the economy is more service-driven and construction activity and the like. But we're closer to the peak, and hopefully we'll get through that relatively soon. But it's not without headwinds as well. There's geopolitical risks currently playing out. Who knows what Donald Trump's going to do next. Inflation is starting to tick back up a little bit, and unemployment is also still increasing, albeit not to the same levels as what was projected by some parties. So perhaps that's a sign that we are again closer to that peak, and we're starting to sort of get through to the other side.
That's all for today. The Detail is a Newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Robert Campbell and Alice Peacock. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Jeremy Ansell. I'm Amanda Gillies. Mā te wā.